using art to look at and investigate and interrogate difficult times like this is a much gentler way, than government reports or long editorials. I feel like we can actually put ourselves into the face of these characters and gently ask ourselves, like, what would I have done? And I don't think it's meant to be dogmatic or prescriptive, or it's just meant to be gentle, and it's less about blame and more about understanding.
Hello, everyone. I'm film critic Amy Nicholson. That was Small Things Like These. And please, hello to our star and our producer, Cillian Murphy. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
Cillian, I want to start by asking, you wrapped filming your Oscar-winning role for Best Actor from Oppenheimer, but then you turned your attention to this story, based
Yeah.
on a novel by Claire Keegan, not just acting in it, but producing a film for the very first time. Why this?
Oh, well, there's many reasons, I suppose. But primarily it was because the novel was so good and I read it and it stayed with me and it kind of haunted me. I was thinking about it for about a year after I read it. So that was one reason. The other reason was that I was very keen to work with Tim Mealance, our director again. I'd worked with him on Peaky Blinders season 3 and just recognized that he was a really special talent. And then the other reason is that my wife actually said, "What about this, Kill?" And Tim was over visiting me, and we were kind of throwing around ideas and looking at different things and material and possibilities, and so I checked to see if the rights were available, and miraculously they still were, which was kind of a miracle. And so then we started, and I sent it to Enda Walsh, who's my old friend and collaborator, and he got it. And then Alan Maloney, who runs the company with me, Things Films, he got it, and everybody kind of got involved really, really quickly. And then Artist Equity, Matt Damon and Ben Affleck's studio, they paid for it. So it was a variety of things. I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, one thing that makes me really curious, though, is that this is such an Irish story. But
Yes.
you chose Tim, who is a Belgian director. So I'm curious what the two of you talked about to get this exact time and place right. A time that you knew you were a boy in 1985 when this story was set.
Yeah, I was this kid. I mean, I was about 9 or something like that. So it's a distant, distant memory. But I have this theory that sometimes it's good to have sort of a foreign, a different perspective on a story to really be able to tell it truthfully. And that may sound kind of counterintuitive, but I think like if you look at well, a film I did called The Wind That Shakes the Barley, which is directed by an Englishman called Ken Loach, and it's a kind of a definitive film about Irish history. And there's another film that Eileen was in called The Magdalene Sisters, which is directed by Peter Mullen, who's an Englishman. There's a film called 71, Irish film, which is directed by a foreign director. And so, like, I have this theory that the directors then aren't weighed down by the baggage of growing up in the country, and they feel free to come at it in a more kind of oblique, fresher way. And I knew that Tim's sensibility would suit this film because he's a pure art, he's a real artist, in terms of how he uses the camera and especially how he, excuse me, especially how he communicates with actors. So that was my theory, and I feel like it's paid off.
But was this moment, this kind of history of these sisters and these unwed mothers, was this something that you were surprised to find out about when you grew up and read the novel, or was it something that growing up you were sort of aware of, something you felt, something that was whispered about?
Um, Thankfully, I wasn't aware of it directly, when I was growing up as a kid in Cork, but there was a laundry in Cork City where I grew up that was in operation up until about 96, which is kind of staggering. Um, but for my parents and their parent, I mean, it was like this weird kind of cognitive dissonance, where people knew, but they didn't know. And it was all about silence and complicity and shame and the control of the church over almost all aspects of all moral aspects of our lives in Ireland, in terms of they control education, they control the health system. Um, and it was sanctioned by the government, obviously, and they were working closely with the government. So everybody knew, but very few people actually spoke about it. And that's what makes it so fascinating, psychologically and dramatically to try and explore.
I mean, I'm asking this question as a person who survived going to like an Irish Catholic school here in America. I heard that when you went to an Irish Catholic school in Cork, you sometimes got into trouble. Is that true?
Ah, yeah. But like nothing. I was taught by Christian brothers or Presentation Brothers. So yeah, I would have been in trouble. But like, I'm reluctant to bring it up given the real horrors that went on in some schools and some industrial schools, particularly. I was just a messer.
I mean, I want to ask a little bit more about this character William that you're playing. In the flashback scenes in this movie, I was really struck by how intelligent and hardworking young William was. That there's this gap in the film between the kid who wants to read Dickens and the adult that you're playing who never got to finish reading Dickens.
Hmm.
And I was thinking one of the things that really strikes me about this story is I've seen movies about people who feel stuck in their circumstances. They're ambitious for more money, a better job, a better house. But this movie feels really particular in that William feels like he hungers for a better soul.
Well, that's really interesting. That's a nice take on it. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a great line by William Trevor, who's one of our great writers. He says that what happens in childhood happens forever. And I feel like that's a brilliant quote and very poetic, but I also think it applies to this story and to this film because, what happens to Bill as a youngster, his mother has him out of wedlock, to use that expression, and but she's taken in by the woman that she works for, and so therefore there is like this um his life is defined by an act of charity, an act of kindness, you know. Um, and I think then his world is kind of opened by this character, Mrs. Wilson, who gives him books and it opens his mind. And I think I'm a firm believer that, reading novels really expands you as a person and expands your mind empathetically. Do you know what I mean? Because you are literally walking in someone else's shoes and understanding other people's perspective. So he has that opened up to him as a youngster. And then I think he has no outlet for that, then as he grows up. I think the marriage is functioning and working, but I don't think it's operating on a very deep level. So these deeper thoughts that he has, they have no outlet. So he's not able to really express his feelings or his emotions. But there's something eating away in it at him, and I think he hasn't dealt with the death of his mother. That's clearly coming to take roost in his midlife. And I think that's a very male thing as well, the pushing stuff away, pushing stuff down, and then all of a sudden it reappears with a vengeance. And I think that's what's happening. So there's a confluence of things happening for him emotionally, but I think it all does go back to when he was a kid. And also this lacking this father figure or not knowing who this father was, that's a huge thing as well. So there's all of these elements. That's why it's such a seemingly simple story, but it's actually incredibly complex.
Well, yeah, I mean, William himself, he seems like a simple man who doesn't do a lot of talking. I could only imagine what his kids were sort of picturing was happening in him.
Yeah.
Do you play a quiet man who keeps so much inside?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
How do you play a quiet
Oh.
man who keeps so much inside?
Well, I remember like Enda, who gave me my first ever job ever as a professional actor, wrote the script. We've made many projects over the years, and um, he, we talked for a long time about like making him as sort of non-verbal or monosyllabic as possible. And the trick then is to try and transmit or communicate what he's feeling or thinking through just being or existing in that world. And I had an amazing director who really understands the power of, I think, actors in repose and reflection. And then you got to feel it and think it. And it's my favorite type of acting is to try and communicate, without text. So I don't know. It was a real challenge we set ourselves.
I mean, I like that you're doing this challenge though with Enda Walsh. I mean, to kind of expand on it, like you've known him since you were a teenager. He gave you,
Yeah.
your first professional lead in the play Disco Pigs, which was, the production that changed the direction of your life. And I'm sure people watching, they know Enda from like Sing Street and Hunger.
Yeah.
That you're still working together 30 years later. He must have seen you grow up as an artist and vice versa.
Yeah, and I think that's probably what it is, that he can write for me. He knows my kind of strengths, and he can write to them. And I'm a serial recollaborator. Like, I'm obsessed with it. It's the thing, I think, that for me produces the richest work, and I'll continue to work with Enda. And I just made another film with Tim, and Eileen. I worked with her again after 28 years, and obviously I made six films now with Chris Nolan. So for me, that's where you get the deepest, richest, like most vulnerable, rawest work, is when you are in a position of trust with your collaborators.
Let's actually keep talking about Eileen Walsh for a second. Like there were some times when I was watching her play your wife, Eileen, where I was frustrated by her character's practicality, but then I kept reminding myself, this is a character who's just making the kind of decisions, choosing to stick to the same priorities that pretty much everybody else would make in that same scenario.
I think so, yeah, and I think she's a representative of a lot of Irish society at that time, and a lot of Irish mothers at that time. I think you kind of have to balance it up on a scale of what she has to lose if she messes with the status quo, and what she has to lose is the future of her five daughters. This business that her husband has managed to create, and at a time where almost everyone of his age and their age were like leaving the country and emigrating and not coming back. So that's the massive leverage that the church had over everyone. And she's a really good mother and a really good wife and a really good person, I think. But she's prioritizing, as everyone does in these situations where people are oppressed. And I think that it's really interesting to me that sometimes the system of oppression is run by the people themselves who are oppressed. And I think she kind of represents that. Her and many of the other kind of people that we meet in the town.
I have to ask this, forgive me for this, but when you have that needle drop in the movie of Come on, Eileen, it's like a
Mm.
tiny bit of fun.
Oh, for Eileen herself?
Or just
Well,
even having that in the movie. Like, by the way, this is Ireland in the 80s, and because everybody loved the song.
everyone loves the song, and she is like, when the script came along, it was, the character's called Eileen, and Eileen is called Eileen, and Eileen is one of five kids, and like there was, and we've known each other forever, so there was so many reasons that it should be Eileen to play the part. But then we were searching for like little tiny little breadcrumbs for the audience that would place the movie, because it kind of can appear like it's set in the 50s. So we had to pick a song that everybody knows, and I guess it was just a happy coincidence that it's the same name.
Well, tell me how you cast Lewis Kerwin, who plays you younger, who plays young Bill. Like, tell me about him. Tell me about his audition.
Well, the casting director on the film is an incredible casting director called Maureen Hughes, who again I had worked with really, really early on in my career when I was just starting out, and she cast me in things. She kind of believed in me when nobody else did when I was very young. And um, she's amazing at finding youngsters. She cast Eamon Owens in The Butcher Boy. I don't know if you remember that Neil Jordan movie. He gave this phenomenal performance, and she's just a brilliant. She has an amazing eye. So we were really struggling. It was like the 11th hour. We didn't have the kid. We'd seen like loads and loads and loads of kids, and she said, "No, we'll find him. Don't worry, we'll find him. Just we'll find him." And then it genuinely was like a couple of days before we were starting to shoot, and she was casting something else, a musical theater piece. And this kid came in, and she was immediately struck by him, and she said, "Oh, you look a little bit like somebody I know." And she said, so he read for that play, the musical, and then she said, "Would you mind reading these lines as well?" And then he came in, and we met him, and he was just instantly brilliant. And it was just one of those things where the movie gods were looking out for us, and Maureen kept the faith and found him. So we were just really lucky.
When you meet a young actor like that on a set like this, where he's like suddenly now working on a big production, how do
Yeah.
you like to welcome them to the business of acting? How do you like to make them feel comfortable? Let them know what their life is going to be like.
Well, obviously, I didn't have any scenes with him because he was
Yeah.
playing me. But uh, Tim is a brilliant director of kids. He just makes it feel like it's not work. We're just having fun. And a lot of the time, when we were around, like particularly with my daughters, the camera will be rolling before they know that. So there's no, that the tension that action and cut brings. They didn't experience that. And a lot of the times we would just start playing games or singing songs, whatever, and then we would just start rolling surreptitiously, and you get this beautiful natural kind of performance, unaffected, unself-conscious, and we got the same, I think, with Louis. Like it was just he was just having fun, and that's, I think, when kids are unsubconscious and just like not thinking about it, that's when you get the best stuff.
Well, yeah, and I love this whole Christmas setting of it. I was thinking, I don't know if this is like a deliberate resonance for the film, but like setting this film at Christmas, at several Christmases. I mean, Christmas is the setting of the most famous story that we have in history about an unmarried mom.
Yeah, of course. I mean, everything in her writing is so deliberate. So everything is precisely chosen for a reason. So you're absolutely right. And like, it's very Dickensian as well, this kind of Christmas setting and the rebirth and the new year and all of this stuff. And so yeah, everything is done for a reason. And like things look so beautiful with Christmas lights. It's just aesthetically, it just works, even in a town where people are quite, I think, but they're sort of they're struggling, but yeah, Christmas offers this sense of optimism.
Well, Emily Watson, she won Best Supporting Actor at the Berlin Film Festival, based
Yeah,
really, I think, on the strength of that just terrific scene that the two of you have over tea.
yeah,
Watching that scene, I kept thinking that the line between powerful nun and powerful mob boss was a bit blurry. But I wanted to hear from you about those days of filming.
yeah, absolutely. Well, that scene was only one day. We did that in one day. Um, Again, we were kind of struggling to find the right actor for Sister Mary, and this one I'll take credit for, because I had a dream, like that kind of liminal kind of space before you're asleep, before you've woken up, and you're not quite asleep. And then I dreamt it should be Emily Watson, it's an actor who I've adored for years. And I said it to everyone, and they said great, and we sent her the scene, and she immediately said yes. Um, but yeah, and she's absolutely stunning in it, because basically the whole scene is people, they have tea and they talk about his kids, and it's pure banality, nothing's happening, but underneath it, it's like everything is at stake. So you had to have a really intelligent, brilliant actor who could play all the subtext and all of the space between the lines, which is really what it was. And then yeah, I think Tim really lent into the kind of horror mafia tropes there, because that's what we were doing. I mean, that huge long pan around for her first intro, that's kind of like something out of The Shining or something like that. And when she slips the piece, the envelope over the table, I mean, that's classic mob boss stuff. And but you needed an actor who had that gravitas and that sort of natural authority, and also who has that like inherent intelligence, which she has all of those things. So she's one of my favorite people.
Yeah, I mean, essentially to be like, nice education your daughters have. Shame if they weren't able to continue it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does that happen to you a lot, having dreams that give you great ideas?
Occasionally, yeah. I think if you can access them, and you have to be in the right frame of mind. And whenever I'm making a film, I get into this state of like intense creativity. You're in this kind of flow state all the time. And even when you go to bed, you're still trying to fix the problems. So and I find a lot of times I'll go to bed and then wake up and I'll have the solution. A lot of it'll be tiny stuff, like how to play a scene, or like how to fix a dialogue, or how to fix a scene, or how to fix the edit. But yeah, I really believe in the subconscious doing the work for you.
That's fascinating. I'm picturing like a little notebook by your bed for good ideas so you don't forget them.
If it's good enough, I don't even need to write it down. It stays there, it lodges itself.
Yeah. But one thing that really struck me about your performance in that scene with Emily is there were moments where I felt like I could see the small boy inside of you,
All right, cool.
like in your carriage and things. Like how were you really playing that scene for yourself?
That was a note that Tim did give me, actually, about playing the boy, just to try and play the boy. A lot of the time, actually, not just in that scene, but a lot of the time, try and play that sort of that 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 boy that's been wounded, you know, who's never quite grown up. I don't know. I don't think about it really. I mean, it's an awful lot of trying to get away from intellect, you know, and not to try and think about it, but just to be totally open and porous in the moment. That's really to be totally available and just present is really what you have to do, and to be just thinking as the character, you know, to clear your mind of everything else and just think that the character, and listening is the biggest key. I think the most important key in a big scene like that is listening intently to what the other actor is communicating to you.
Is that something you learned to do, or is it something you have to unlearn to figure out how to be so receptive?
Oh, I think it's a long process of just error, trial and error and trial and error. But like when you really, I think you can see it in a performance. If the two actors aren't listening to each other, it's just rhubarb, 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 rhubarb. But like if you know people are listening, you can feel it, because listening is a really empathetic act and gesture, you know. And again, it's the space between what the characters are saying is the interesting stuff.
I mean, with the with the history that this story tells about like this convent in Ireland or convents like this in Ireland, I was
Hmm.
surprised that you were able to shoot at the actual convent, at the actual town of the setting in the book. I was
Yeah.
curious. I didn't know if the convent was still occupied. I didn't know if the sisters had to be convinced to agree.
We got very lucky on that. And that well, there was a philosophy starting out. The philosophy was we're not going to build any sets, so we didn't build any sets. Everything is a real location. The tiny little house, the convent, the town. Obviously, the whole town is the real town where the book is set. And a lot of that I've actually learned from working with great directors like Ken Loach, or with like Chris Nolan, who will just say, "No, this is how we're doing it." It may be impractical budget wise, or like you know, sort of logistically, but this is how we're going to do it. We didn't shoot we used the exterior of the convent. We had to find another interior for it. So that may have been a reason. And the church that we shot in was a Protestant church and not a Catholic church, because the Catholic church wouldn't allow us in. So we did have impediments, and it wasn't all plain sailing, but we did stick to the philosophy of it being all real locations, because I think when you're in a real location and not in a set build, that the actors feel the energy in the room, they feel the kind of vibrations, they feel the claustrophobia, and it's not like some, you know, crew member leaning up against the flat over there. They're actually in something, a real space, so it adds to the reality of the performance, I think.
I mean, were there things with this being your first film that you've produced that you felt like I have learned this lesson and I am really taking this with me, like in my own producing now? Like I've learned this through my experience on other sets, and this is what I want to do. This is what I don't want to do.
Yeah, like quite a lot. Like I was an EP on executive producer on Peaky for 3 seasons, so I learned an awful lot on that. And then like Alan Maloney, who's my partner on this, we've worked together for like 25 years, so we have a very shared taste and on it. But like for me, it's also the atmosphere on set. Like Tim creates an amazingly warm, um, collegiate, collaborative environment where it's everyone's ideas are welcome, and um, you know, there's no hierarchy. Everyone's there to make the best work, but there's an intense amount of focus. And then one of my main rules is there's absolutely no phones allowed anywhere near set. Um, and that really helps everyone focus, I think, as well. So there's mobile phones or cell phones are verboten.
Is it hard to get everybody on board with that?
Everyone's delighted. Delighted. Yeah.
But before we go, I want to just ask one last question, which is, this film is getting released here in the States, in the UK, and in Ireland. And I'm curious, specifically in Ireland, what kind of audience reaction would you like to see?
Well, it comes out next Friday in Ireland, or this Friday, I should say. And I really don't know. I mean, the response so far has been excellent. And I feel like using art to look at and investigate and interrogate difficult times like this is a much gentler way, you know, than government reports or, you know, long editorials. I feel like we can actually put ourselves into the place of these characters and gently ask ourselves like what would I have done, or how could I would I allow this to happen. And I don't think it's meant to be dogmatic or prescriptive, or it's just meant to be gentle, you know, and it's less about blame and more about understanding.
Well, Cillian Murphy, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, that was a lovely chat. Thanks.